Being able to write is something which is important at pretty much every stage of your life. Whether you're in primary school or high school or uni, or if you're working, you're probably doing some kind of writing. But the thing is, being able to try and put your ideas onto a piece of paper isn't easy. So why is it though that if everyone thinks writing is so important, it isn't one of the skills which most people try to set aside to try and improve? So in today's video, I wanted to go over the ways I try to write better essays at university and to share those tips with you. If you guys are new to the channel, my name is Alfie and I'm a 5th year med student at UCL. And don't forget to subscribe to see more videos like this. And anyways, with that out the way, let's jump into the video. So I've recently been assigned an essay for my most recent GP rotation, and it's an essay about a patient who needs chronic care. In med school, we don't really write too much besides the occasional reflective essays on our experiences, and with the exception of our 3rd year where we did a lot of work with scientific papers and research. If I'm honest, I was never a big fan of reading books or writing when I was a kid, and that's definitely changed as I got older. But compared to my sister who loved reading books, I used to find writing pretty hard. But growing up with her teaching me, grilling me, and showing me better ways to write alongside my teachers at school, I think that there are a few key principles that will help anyone no matter what stage of writing you're at. So when it comes to writing any essay, you definitely need to have a structure at the start. And I think the most basic structure you can have is something like this. So you want to start off with your introduction, and then you want to have about 2 to 3 main points, and then you want to have a conclusion. And this is a structure which works for pretty much most kind of essays. So to kind of go further into each section, I think the first thing I want to start off with is talking about what you want to try and include in your introduction. So your introduction is the first thing that any reader will see, so it's super important. You definitely want to give a clear picture for what you're talking about so that your reader from the start knows what the rest of the essay is about. And so to do this, some really key things to include are, any important definitions at the start, any background information. So for example, if you're writing about heart disease, you'd want to define heart disease, and then you want to give some background information for it. And then maybe some statistics would be useful. So for example, who has heart disease and how many people have heart disease? It's really good if you can kind of give some purpose to it. Why are we looking at this topic? Why is this significant? Why is this important? If you do that, it'll motivate the reader to be like, oh, okay, maybe this is why I should read closer into this, because this is something which affects loads of us. The next paragraph is going to be your first main point. And within your first main point, how I like to structure this is I like to state very clearly at the start what this main point is. And then I like to give examples about things I like to discuss within that. And what really separates good essays from great essays are essays that can be a bit introspective, be reflective, and to give some kind of evaluation. There's usually 2 sides to the story. So for example, if you're saying that the study helps to prove this idea, there may be limitations to that. And if you're able to talk about both sides, it shows that you're not just coming at this essay from one point of view. And then to wrap it all up, you're gonna need a conclusion. And so in your conclusion, you're gonna try and summarize all your main points, and then you're gonna try and also say it in a way which adds new meaning to it. And a way that I like to think about the whole essay structure is a sort of hourglass. So if I start at the top with my introduction, I want something which is quite broad and something which looks at the wider society of what this thing is. And then as I go through my main points, I want it to get more specific, just like the middle point of an hourglass. And then as I get to the conclusion, it kind of becomes wide again, and then it goes into the bigger picture for why we even went into so much depth in the first place. So to go into an example of something which I actually wrote is this heart valve essay from my 3rd year. And so for example, in introduction, we said that we want to try and set the tone, give some background information, and we also want to try to give some reasoning for why we're even looking at this. And so how I did this in this essay was I said that heart valve disease is an increasingly prevalent and underdiagnosed condition expected to exceed 500 million cases globally by 2050. And then at the end of my intro, I stated how I was going to try and explore this topic of heart valve replacements. And so I said, to gain a better insight of the current situation, we will be examining age-dependent age-dependent, we will be examining age-dependent structural valve degeneration, emerging engineering designs, immunological insights on structural valve degeneration, that's a mouthful, application of tissue engineering, and discussion of the future of biological heart valves. And then we'd kind of go back to a wider picture to society in the conclusion. And how I did that here is saying, with the prize being a share of a $1 billion annual market, the competition to produce the perfect heart valve replacement is incredibly intense. And at the end, I said, ultimately, the future of biological heart valves depends greatly on our collaborative effort to overcome age-dependent structural valve degeneration via a combination of novel designs, genetic modification, and tissue engineering. So as you can see there, we're going back to the wider purpose for why this is all relevant and how we can get to the greater purpose. Now moving on to the second tip, which is the P or P structure. So the P structure is something which I learned back in high school, and it's spelled either PEE or PEA, but it can mean pretty much the same thing. And it stands for point, evidence, and explain for P, or point, evidence, and analysis for P as well. What this is trying to get you to do is, within your main point, you're gonna have several smaller points about this main point to support it. But within these points, you need to make sure that you fully go into it so that you're not just listing off a bunch of things. And what this P structure tries to guide you to do is, you have your point, you give some evidence for it. That evidence might be some statistics, or it might be a quote from a book, it might be anything to help give it more strength. And then you analyze all this. If you just write down points without giving any evidence or any analysis, you're just leaving a bare point on its own. The way I like to think of it is like a burger. I like to think of the point as like the patty, but who just eats a patty by itself? You need to have things with it. You want to have a bun, some veggies, some sauce, and those things are your evidence and your analysis of all that. Now, if you have everything together, then you have a solid burger. But if you just have the point itself, then you're just going to be having the patty. Just remember, point, evidence, and analysis. P. So moving on to my third tip. Back when I was in high school, my English teacher would always say a lot about little instead of saying a little about a lot. This idea was drilled into me so much during my sixth form. It kind of links with the last point about the PEA structure. What it means is that it's better if you have 2 or 3 solid ideas that you go fully in depth with, rather than 10 ideas that you kind of just scrape the surface of. If you're just writing loads and loads of different points without fully going into them, how's anyone going to follow that and know what you're actually trying to say? So remember, just as my old English teacher said, say a lot about a little instead of a little about a lot. All right, guys, so moving on to point number 4, which is making sure that you plan from the start. You always hear your teachers in school say, make sure you plan your essays, and most people end up just kind of scribbling a bit here and there. But trust me, when you get to uni, planning is super important. The better you plan and the more work you put in there, the less work writing it actually takes. It just makes it easier to go back to your plan whenever you need to make changes in your essay, and for you to be able to make these changes in a logical and systematic way. And that way you can also check if your ideas make sense and if the flow of your ideas makes sense. And I personally like really getting into depth with the planning, going into specify all the different references I'm using and all the different ideas I have. And it's really important that you do things like referencing from the start. It's a nightmare to write your whole essay and then put the references where it needs to be throughout it. I remember in 3rd year for my first assignment, that's how I did it. And I remember like an hour before the deadline, I was just trying to slot in the references, and it was just a mess, and I was hand typing out the references. So don't ever do that. And when it comes to references, make sure you use something like Mendeley. It doesn't matter what you use as long as you're doing something from the start. And the last thing which I want to talk about, which will really help to elevate your writing to the next level, is trying to write as simply as you can. And what I mean is, if you're explaining difficult concepts, then try and explain that in simple terms whenever you can. The whole point of writing is to put your thoughts onto paper and to share your ideas with others. The simpler you can write, the easier it should be for others to follow it and understand what you're trying to say. At the same time, it's a balance of things. If you're writing a scientific paper, then you need to make sure you use the right terms in the right places. The thing is, don't feel the need to use big, complex words that most people wouldn't understand if you can say the exact same thing in a couple of words. At the end of the day, appreciating writing is going to be subjective. What one person writes about a topic is going to be different to what someone else will write about the same topic. If you can try to follow a systematic approach where you're ticking off boxes and making sure you're saying the right things in the right places, if you make sure that you're following a simple essay structure, if you make sure that you go into as much depth as you can for each point that you make, try to explain your ideas as clearly and as simply as you can, then I think that you're definitely going to get better. And that's the whole point of it, right? Your writing isn't something which is going to change overnight. It's going to take some time and it's going to take some practice. Anyways, that pretty much wraps up this video. I hope you guys enjoyed some of those tips. Thank you guys for watching, and until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Bye-bye.